As I am preparing this video, it is currently 2021, and we've all been stuck in a state of emergency for, well, about 14 months now. I don't want to trivialize it. What we've been going through is difficult. The isolation, the anxiety. Hell, some of us have even lost our jobs or loved ones to the pandemic. But at the same time, you gotta see it from a writer's perspective. We're not heartless people, we just have a tendency to take that pain and wonder how you can make a story out of it. Stories can be extremely cathartic in times such as these. We've seen that proven time and time again. There is something very healing about seeing a deep personal fear of yours reflected in someone else, whether that person be the writer of a book or the audience in an entire movie theater. If you are personally offended by the existence of these movies, then I can understand that. As you know, these times have touched some of us more personally than others. Only know that by highlighting these movies, I am not trying to make fun of the real world event. My goal here is only to explore and maybe even to predict the ways that our current cultural climate might affect horror for the years to come. Because I have something to tell you, it's not just coming.
It's here.
Yeah, that's right. The pandemic horror movies have caught your scent and they're hunting. I don't know what that was. So without further ado, let's take a look at the first movie on this list. Corona. Fear is a virus. No. So, Corona, Fear is a Virus was one of the first movies to be made about the coronavirus and in fact was shot before the pandemic even happened. It was also made in the very same province that I was born, so you're welcome, kiddies. So, the inciting incident in this movie is that a Chinese woman steps onto an elevator with a bunch of people, including this dude with a swastika on the side of his bald head. Everyone has a case of being an irredeemable dick, but things get a lot worse when the Chinese woman coughs and everyone immediately assumes that she must have COVID. It's like that M. Night Shyamalan movie Devil, except if the devil was a woman who probably just smoked a little bit too much before leaving her apartment. The director, and technically writer, although he only wrote out an outline for the actors to improvise around, Mustafa Keshvari said that he came up with the idea after he read about Asian tourists becoming the victims of hate crimes. And I do applaud him or anyone else trying to draw attention to these issues. Corona, Fear is a Virus, makes it clear even with its title what sort of fears it's going to be responding to. Group paranoia and contagion. Let's talk about group paranoia first because oh my gods is there a lot to say about that one. Horror stories about group paranoia became extremely popular during the Red Scare, when Americans were living under the constant fear that anyone, even their own neighbor, could be a communist. In response to this fear, we get movies like The Thing, which is literally about a monster that's capable of turning into anyone at any time.
I know I'm human. Some of you are still human. This thing doesn't want to show itself. It wants to hide inside an imitation.
Or even Psycho, where the killer turns out to be your average all-American boy.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
Honestly, one of my favorite stories about group paranoia would probably have to be Arthur Miller's 1953 play, The Crucible, which is entirely about the Salem witch trials, while also making it clear that there are no witches. There are only spoiled little girls pointing their fingers at people that they just don't like and sentencing them to death. This becomes a problem when the play's protagonist, John Proctor, a flawed but, mostly okay guy, gets accused of witchcraft and cannot prove his innocence because how do you prove something to someone who's already made up their mind about you?
My name I cannot sign.
Why?
Because it is my name! I have given you my soul. Leave me my name!
The whole thing becomes a solid metaphor for the Red Scare, and this time where you could be punished either for having the wrong political opinions or for being thought to have those opinions. As far as Corona, Fear is a Virus goes, I think it just has one itty-bitty little problem. I don't know if too soon is the right word, because this movie was literally reacting to something that had only just started, and it doesn't feel like it understands what it's talking about. But even that is eclipsed by the much bigger problem that is, this movie doesn't understand how the world works in general. Problem 1. The pregnant lady is literally in labor the entire movie and gives absolutely no indication that she's in any pain until she is in the process of pushing the baby out. Problem 2. Even before the elevator breaks down, this is the world's longest elevator ride. Problem 3. Nobody brings up the fact that they should all probably be wearing masks until the Chinese lady shows up. And by that point, there are already 6 people in the elevator. My apartment has the rule of 2 people per elevator with masks. The entire movie just gave me anxiety. Problem 4. Literally every character is unrealistically horrible.
You guys are acting like you're seeing an alien or something like that.
Well, you know,
technically,
the virus did come from animals, so.
Except for the Chinese woman, who continues to try and communicate with everyone in full Mandarin sentences long after they've already made it clear that they don't care to understand her.
不是你叫他深呼吸。
don't turn around. Cough over there somewhere.
And in fact, they have already assaulted her. Problem 5. Most elevators have services put in place in case of breakdown, like a button that alerts the fire department, or a phone that goes straight to the superintendent. Especially in places as expensive looking as this, and yet nobody seems to consider it. In reality, this movie would be such a non-conflict for most of these characters. They'd probably just call someone to get them out of the elevator and then go about their day, continuing to be racist and awful. The only people who might be inconvenienced by the elevator breaking down would be the Asian woman, who does have to deal with their racist comments, but hopefully in this universe they'd be able to get her out before the assault, I don't know. And the pregnant woman, who literally gives birth in an elevator. But this movie is much less about her and more about how her husband is the definition of human scum.
Oh, you beating up on little girls now?
Protecting my wife.
Really, huh?
You wouldn't know what that's about, selfish bastard.
So to give us this movie that supposedly commented on the paranoia stirred up by COVID, but then setting it in a universe that feels just so separated from reality, I don't think this movie succeeded in what it set out to do as much as I applaud what it was trying to do. Stop Asian hate, I'll leave it at that. Paranoia often plays a role in Contagion horror as well, but it doesn't have to. Look at something like Cabin Fever, which deals with a group of friends that contract a rare disease and then start turning on each other in an attempt to save themselves. A lot of horror movies like to play with this idea that when the chips are down, no one will be there to save you. The only person you can really count on is yourself. But we'll talk a little bit more about Contagion in just a little bit, because that is a major theme in our next movie, Songbird, produced by Michael Bay. This one takes place in the year 2024, when COVID-19 has mutated into COVID-23 after 4 straight years of lockdown. And now Archie Andrews needs to save his girlfriend from the concentration camps where they send suspected COVID cases. There's just so much going on in this movie, I literally don't know which part of that description sounds worse. Is it the concentration camps? The 4 straight years of lockdown? Or this scene in the frickin' trailer where a guy almost gets shot by military officials for being outside his house? And it's just like... On the one hand, I do understand that we are living in a time of fear and that it's very easy for many of us to think that this is where we're headed. But when it comes to horror that preys on real life fears like this, we do kind of have to ask ourselves, is this cathartic or is this fear-mongering? I don't know. I see this movie and I see nothing but a heavy sense of dread and pessimism. The last thing that I need right now is some drivel about how the most exciting thing we have to look forward to over the next 4 years is KJ Appa's abs. Okay, that isn't entirely fair. The movie does try to be hopeful by interrupting this corrupt business that's secretly hoarding all the vaccines. The corruption of big business is obviously not a new theme in horror. We've seen it in everything from American Psycho to Child's Play 3.
And what are children, after all, but consumer trainees?
But I do have to admit, it does feel a little bit different here in 2021, when distrust towards, well, pretty much every establishment seems to be on the rise. We have one side that doesn't trust that the election was done honestly, one side that wants to completely abolish the police force, and meanwhile Songbird over here is telling us that if we all just find the right corporation to pull down, then we will all find a vaccine that we will all unite on, and it will finally be over. But anyway, what else is there? Well, similar to Corona Fear is a Virus, we also get the themes of paranoia and contagion. And I'll talk about Contagion first this time. This movie plays on the fear of not only losing a loved one to an infectious disease, but potentially contracting that disease yourself and losing everything, either as a result of other people's paranoia or because of literal death. Honestly, I don't know if Songbird handles these themes quite as well as other horror movies do. And there are some pretty good horror movies out there about contagion. The 1986 movie The Fly may not seem like a movie about contagion on the surface, but really think about it. It very much does play on that fear of watching a loved one deteriorate and die in front of you, all while there's nothing you can do to stop it. I find it one of the more horrifying movies out there for that reason. The Fly also plays a little bit with the idea of infection, as Veronica not only has to watch her once boyfriend die, she's also pregnant with his child, and has to deal with the reality of what being the mother to a half-fly son would be like. The 2013 movie Contracted takes a much more obvious disease approach to the whole thing, as we follow a protagonist who has contracted an STD after a sexual assault, at which point she begins rotting away, becoming a literal living zombie, which honestly was probably a movie reacting to fears around HIV and AIDS. But Contracted and The Fly are both body horror movies that focus on the isolated case of one disease, whereas with Songbird, as much as these themes are impossible to avoid due to the very nature of the plot, they very much take a back seat to the whole corrupt business plotline, and I can understand why. Contagion is a terrifying topic to breach. Nobody wants to think about the possibility that there's something as insubstantial as a disease out there that can take hold of our loved ones at any moment, and there's nothing that we can do but hope for the best. It's so much easier to just put a human face to the problem, like a corrupt businessman hoarding vaccines. That way you don't have to deal with the brutal truth that some people have and will continue to die. Anyway, what's the next movie on the list? Oh my god, Charles Band, really? For those of you who don't know, Charles Band is the founder of Full Moon Features, a production company that you've probably heard of before, you just can't quite put your finger on it. Full Moon Features mostly made a name for themselves on the video rental market, having figured out a very simple formula. Ridiculous titles, naked people, and gore gets you money. Charles Band alone has directed such classics as The Ginger Dead Man, Evil Bond, and now Corona Zombies. So this movie's protagonist is named Barbie, and she comes home after discovering that there's no toilet paper at the grocery store.
This chick straight up tried to karate chop me for the last pack of toilet paper. I was like, if you need it that bad, take it, hooker.
Only to turn on the news and discover that people are being turned into zombies.
For lack of a better word, Corona zombies.
Why couldn't they be like Heineken zombies? That stuff is skunky.
After a factory in Wuhan, China started testing bat soup. It might be worth mentioning that the majority of this movie is actually cut together from scenes of the 1980 Italian zombie movie Hell of the Living Dead and the 2012 Zombies vs. Strippers. They just gave everything a comedic dub-in, which I do have to admit greatly improves the movie.
Just a few quick announcements. First of all, the company picnic on Saturday has been cancelled. And oh yeah, one more thing. Run for your lives. Flesh-eating Corona zombies have been unleashed.
I'm a big fan of things like Mystery Science Theater, and there were a couple of moments during the dubbed scenes where I could have sworn that was what I was watching.
Just look at this place. Haven't seen this much smoke since a Snoop Dogg concert.
But I have to admit, the cuts between 2020 and 1980 are extremely jarring. Sometimes in a charming way, but other times it's just like there's this scene here that seems to be making light of workplace sexual harassment.
Are you hitting on me in the workplace?
Yeah, I suppose I am. You're not gonna get all Me Too on me now, are you?
And when I first saw it, my eyes told me, oh, it's a 1980s movie. I'm used to hearing problematic things from movies made in the 1980s, so I almost gave it a pass. But then I thought, this movie was written in 2020, during a time when we all had enough cultural awareness to know that this isn't okay. So is it worth it to make light of the actual reality of workplace sexual harassment that women do face, just so that we can get that tiny surge of enjoyment out of hearing someone from the 1980s refer to the Me Too movement? It's just a little surreal, 2021 has got me thinking way too much, you guys. Out of all of these too soon movies, I definitely recommend this one the most. The fact that all the zombies come from movies that were shot long before COVID was even a thought makes it all feel very disconnected from reality, but in a very hyperbolic, funny sort of way. The only thing I kept thinking while I was watching this movie is you can either laugh or cry, and this movie very much chose to laugh. I can understand if you think that's inappropriate, and in fact, I don't entirely disagree. I'm just saying this is the best movie on the list. Also, if you do decide to check it out, consider trying one of its sequels, Barbie and Kendra Save the Tigerkin, and Barbie and Kendra Storm Area 51. So on the one hand, it does feel sort of weird to comment on the sorts of fears that a movie like Corona Zombies is playing on, but I do think that we have something here, especially considering that we've also gotten the zombie movie COVID-21 Lethal Virus. The figure of the zombie may seem like a simple one, but guys, the history is long and complicated. The myth of the zombie first started showing up in 17th and 18th century Haiti, which was under French rule at the time and often brought in African slaves to work on plantations. These early stories would feature voodoo shamans that would use magic to turn people into zombies and then trap them on a plantation to work endlessly as a mindless corpse. The whole thing obviously being a metaphor for how slavery would make you feel, and the voodoo sorcerers being stand-ins for white plantation owners. The very first time that we saw zombies in film, however, was in 1932's White Zombie, where zombies seemed to be a metaphor for, coveting your neighbor's wife. The whole slavery theme is still present here because Bela Lugosi's character is actually a plantation owner who mans his plantation with zombies. But the main plot is all about this guy who wants to get this girl, but then, oh no, she's already engaged. Better use voodoo magic to turn her into my zombie sex slave. The zombies in this movie aren't really a threat. When they aren't being commanded by Bela Lugosi anymore, they just kind of throw themselves off a cliff. The idea of a zombie apocalypse wasn't really a thing until the 1968 movie
Night of the Living Dead,
which incidentally draws heavy influence from Richard Matheson's 1954 novel, I Am Legend. I Am Legend follows protagonist Robert Neville, the last man left alive after some nuclear event has turned the entire world population into vampires. It's actually a really good read, and I recommend it to anyone who can sit through a lot of 1950s machismo writing, which unfortunately I apparently can. But it is strange to me how resistant the public seem to be to this idea of a vampire apocalypse, while still really wanting to further this idea of being one of the last ones left alive after something has destroyed the world.
please say hello to me.
Of the 3 film adaptations of I Am Legend, only one of them, the 1964 The Last Man Left on Earth, starring Vincent Price, actually keeps the whole vampire motif. And the zombies in Night of the Living Dead perform pretty much the same function as the vampires in I Am Legend. To the point that George A. Romero even described the process of writing Night of the Living Dead by saying, I had written a short story which I basically had ripped off from a Richard Matheson novel called I Am Legend. The slavery metaphor seems to be gone entirely now, although many audiences have still interpreted Night of the Living Dead to be a comment on race relations in America. Over time, however, even that would be stripped away from the zombie, as they eventually became metaphors for things like capitalism, the Vietnam War, fear of nuclear war, and quite often, the literal end of the world. It's not really a stretch to see how the figure of the zombie might become a metaphor for this pandemic as well. By the way, little side note here, I really wanted to talk about I Am Legend in this video because I remember back in January when 2021 first started, there was this post that people kept sharing around that basically claimed that I Am Legend takes place in 2021 and that the zombie outbreak started because of a vaccine, which is just factually untrue. The novel is set in 1976 and it's about vampires caused by a nuclear fallout, clearly a metaphor for the Cold War. I'm assuming that they're talking about the Will Smith movie, but even that one was set in 2012 and is about people who were mutated by a measles virus, not a vaccine. But all that isn't important, that's just the comic book guy in me coming out.
And send and sip.
What is interesting to me is the way that these stories can keep reappropriating themselves over time. When Richard Matheson first wrote I Am Legend, he was responding to fears around the breakdown of the nuclear family, an upsurgence in feminism, and the possibility of nuclear fallout. And apparently in 2021, there are some people who feel the need to go back to that story, albeit in a slightly updated way so that it reflects more of our modern anxieties. That isn't necessarily something that I think any of the movies on this list here today have succeeded at, but I do believe that with enough time and maybe enough healing so that we can process our complicated thoughts, we are going to get that one really good horror movie that properly explores our current fears.
This lockdown sucks. It's been like 2 hours and I'm already bored.
Although donating to my Patreon is unnecessary, it is hugely appreciated. As little as $3 a month could help me put out many more videos. On that note, I'd like to thank Wilson L. Ricks III, Scott Falks, Andre K, and Thrill House. Thank you so much for your support. It means the world to me. I can't wait to see you all next time.